Welcome to this episode of What Happens Next. I'm really pleased to introduce Ian to our audience today. I'm fascinated by what Ian's got to share, but also we've had a bit of pre-interview travel chat because Ian's just come back from Antarctica. So we won't talk about it too much on the interview. But if you ever get the opportunity to chat to Ian, definitely ask him about Antarctica. Ian, how are you today?
Chris, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm enormously well, and yes, still buzzing from my time down in the far south. So.
Oh, love it! Absolutely love it. And one thing that we didn't talk about before, and I'm really curious about this, is you've got a really good relationship, by the sounds of it, with your in-laws, not your in-laws, but actually the mum and dad of your wife's husband. How did that come to play?
So my daughter's husband,
yeah, your daughter's husband, yeah.
So my daughter, talk about travel. My daughter, when she was 16, went on a British Schools Expeditionary Society summer expedition to the Amazon, where she met at that point her now husband. Now, given that she's 30 and got married 2 years ago, they therefore met when they were 16, 17 and have known each other since. So through those teenage years and beyond, we got to know my son-in-law James as parents. My wife is called Jane. And by some fascinating happy accident, my son-in-law's parents are also called Ian and Jane. So it had to be. The universe was speaking, and it had to be. So yeah, we've therefore known each other for some 13 odd years, and it's great that we get to go on holiday with them as well because they're such fun.
How do you decide when somebody says Ian what Ian they're talking to?
Well, Ian and I play it up brilliantly. Yeah, we just kind of go who, and it's quite funny on our travels that we turn up at hotels and we hand our passports and credit cards in, and they kind of go, hang on, what's this double booking? Who's something duplicated. Or it's even better when we turn up at airports to check in and they hand over the passports and they go, what, 2 Janes? And they go, you're going to love it in a minute.
Love that. So on What Happens Next, we're dedicated to helping people navigate change in their lives, particularly in their 50s and 60s when they are probably finishing their main occupation, but not ready to stop anytime soon, and actually they are quite excited about the next chapter of their lives. Tell us a bit about you and why you think this is something that you can add a bit of value to.
So a little bit about me. I mean, the one thing I would say is one of those pivotal books for me in recent times was The 100-Year Life. And if you get the opportunity to read that, its fundamental message is the fact that, we potentially can and live very long lives. And therefore we have the opportunity for us to live very fulfilling long lives. And that old model of, childhood and education, 40-year career, and then, a very short retirement and death, is no longer the model anymore. So for me, that's really important personally that I get the opportunity to live, I'm now in my 60s to potentially have a very fulfilling life, for many, many more years to come. So what do I do to create that very fulfilled life is have a very fulfilled professional life. I work in many regards with lots of SME business leaders. And for many of them, they may well be feeling overwhelmed. They lack clarity. They often will not necessarily have clarity around their purpose and what they truly want. And they may well be running their businesses. Those businesses may be successful, but there's that missing pieces. Misalignment, lack of coherence, and or so what's the outcome of them running this business? Where do they want to go? And for some it may well be exit and an event like that. For some of it may well be handing on to the next generation. Some it may just be, scaling and growing further. And so I work with them as mentor, coach, and also as a pinnacle guide, which helps them understand how to get the most out of their business whilst being personally satisfied doing that.
Yeah.
And so for some people, it's a challenge about. I talk quite often that there's an awful lot of talented amateurs running business. So I help them professionalize that business. I help them get some organization structure. And one of those key things, helping them get to that point where they are handing over and delegating more effectively. So
love that. So I did promise you that we'd go off on a few tangents as we spoke, and I've written down about 3 things that I want to explore further. 100-Year Life. That's for anybody who hasn't read that book. What was it that you got out of it the most, and how's it personally impacted your journey into what happens next?
I think what the greatest impact is the idea of almost the kind of the need to reinvent, the need to learn new skills, to create new connections, and that acknowledgement that we are living in an ever-changing world. I mean, that might be a bit of an understatement at the moment. And so the ability to reskill, the ability to have new connections, to be able to have, new directions to one's life, is what really struck home for me. And therefore, I embrace that very strongly.
Yeah, no, I love that. Absolutely love that. And when you're working with business owners, what is it that's the recurring theme in terms of the frustration? Because you mentioned about overwhelm, you mentioned about lack of clarity and purpose. What's the theme you see happening time and time again that business owners should really take a look in the mirror and think about?
I think it's quite often, one of again the influential books to me is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or Leaders, the Stephen Covey book, and it's that thing of start with the end in mind.
Yeah.
So for many people, it's knowing and understanding, what the end is, and sometimes that can be the end to a particular initiative or a particular phase of the business, but also, what's the end purpose of the business. And so to my mind, without that clear, then it's not surprising that there's almost the regular occurrence of confusion and I might say chaos sometimes, in not necessarily having a very clear vision about where they are aiming to get to, and therefore not surprised that they get distracted or delayed in achieving something that they want to achieve.
Yeah, or creating themselves a job when actually they aim to run a business, right? Which is a fairly typical thing. I mean, it's really interesting when you talk about the 100-Year Life, because the Stephen Covey principle that sprang to mind was actually that the importance of sharpening the saw. In a world where there's so much change and it's all fundamental. Learning those skills to cope and adapt to the way we live now is really, really fascinating. But it's so interesting, isn't it? It's that element of sort of re-identifying what we really love to do, because for a lot of the clients that come and see us who want to have that money conversation and want to know they've got enough and want to make sure that financially they're independent, that creates a challenge in terms of what purpose actually means in this next phase of their lives. So talk to me a bit about the work you do with clients in terms of helping them re-identify their purpose, or take a look at where they are today and what the next 20 to 30 to 40 years looks like.
So I guess just picking up on that point about the sharpening the saw, is for so many people it is so counterintuitive to stop. That they want to carry on cutting down trees with an ever increasingly blunt saw.
Or a spoon for a lot of people.
Well, exactly, yeah. And so actually, it's so counterintuitive is to actually help people understand that stepping back, taking a breath, taking time away, allows them to truly understand the nature of the challenge that they're facing and or reconnect with their purpose. So to answer your question more fully, it is this idea of helping people to understand what their purpose is. And quite often that's as simple as, so where's the joy in your life and where has the joy been in your life? And for some people, they understand that, their joy comes from creativity, from organization, from, even for some people that they get that sense of joy in a spreadsheet, and if the joy is in a spreadsheet, if the joy is understanding numbers and being analytical, that's where the joy is. And how do we therefore create an environment where they can focus on that joy? And for some people, of course, that joy is seeing the success of other people, or seeing the success of the business, or the successful, delivery of what they deliver in a purposeful way. Is quite often I will ask the question of particularly business leads, why does the business exist? What's the purpose of the business? And people sometimes struggle with that. They will say, oh, what do you mean? It's about creating profit, it's about creating money. I'm like, but does that really excite you? And or what do you do with the profit? What do you do with the money? And a few years ago, I worked with a business up in the Midlands, and there was a very inspiring business leader who, when asked that question, and his team was struggling, and even though they were talking about the products and services that they produced and they delivered, he kind of wandered over to the window and pointed out, and he said, "You see all of those rooftops?" He said, "My purpose is to keep those roofs over, those families and those people who I employ. So I have to provide meaningful employment that people therefore can go and, provide a not only a house, but a home for their family and a community." And that was just so powerful. And equally well, I've worked with organizations where it is very simple. One organization, well, we save lives. What we do saves lives. Another one, it's that we provide care for people. And another is, we simplify business, or, we do help people understand what they're in. So this purposeful approach to what people do is really, really powerful to my mind. And it brings me joy.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And look, we live I'm glad I live in a individualistic, capitalistic country, and because it's given me loads of really great opportunities as an individual. But when we often look at purpose, it's never about us. It's often about the value we add to the world and how we help other people. And it's funny because I've just recorded this morning another video for What Happens Next about, the fact that we often, when we look at well-being, we look at physical well-being and we look at social well-being and we look at, but actually often when we're lost in terms of the direction of our lives, thinking about how we help others, either in our business or personal lives, is a way that we can sort of reconnect. So I absolutely love that. Now, one thing you mentioned, Ian, is Pinnacle. Talk to me about what that is and how that helps your clients and your work within that system and framework.
So I'm a member of the Pinnacle Guides community, which is an international organization which brings together a number of ideas from different sources. Some people may be familiar with things like EOS or Scale Up and the like. And we as Pinnacle Guides bring some of these ideas together to, on the one hand, help business and business leaders execute with discipline and accountability. So it helps put some structure into their organization so they get clear about what their vision is, who are the right people, what are the right metrics, how do they get process, etc., into their world. With the metaphor, and you can kind of see it up behind me there, that sometimes life or business is like climbing a mountain. You know, you've got a desire to get to the top and see the view, but it's a long, hard struggle to get there. And so for us, the metaphor is about, okay, you know, are you on the right mountain? You know, what is the mountain that you're aiming to climb? What's the vision you want to see at the end of it? You know, how will you do it? So what's your playbook or your processes for climbing? And some of those, you know, approaches may be right and may be wrong. You know, it's the right tool at the right time. It's about, you know, have you got the right team of people around you to climb that mountain? And, you know, that's tapping into things like the Jim Collins Good to Great, is if you've got the right people on the bus, and they're in the right seats, you know, you can almost drive anywhere. You know, it's a question then, where do you want to take that? And it is about, you know, performance, and it's about the profitability, from climbing that mountain. You know, will it help you achieve the things that you want, from a purpose point of view, but also from a we live in a commercial world.
Financial goals that allow me to live the life I want.
Correct, absolutely. Yeah. So we act as, you know, again, as the metaphor says, as that mountain guide, as that pinnacle guide to help you climb the mountain. It's not just about, here's a system, go implement it. Although that's part of what we do. You know, if you're going to climb, this is a good way of climbing. But it is also being alongside that business leader to kind of advise, guide, support, mentor, coach. Occasionally, you know, dip into the tool bag and bring out a new tool or model or approach that says, given this challenge, perhaps you might want to take this approach. So,
I find it really interesting for me that, you know, we in our business, Zavelo, we run Traction as an organisation, and that works really well for us. But one of the biggest advantages for me as the business owner is accountability for me individually, because now every week I need to say whether I've hit my goals or not, and clearly I don't want to turn up not hitting those goals.
Correct.
So there's an element of that, you know, build it, as you say, we're talking about it quite a lot on what happens next, because what we often find with clients is they say, particularly our clients who have come from corporate life, they turn around and say, well, you know what, Chris, I'm really glad that I haven't got to turn up at 9 o'clock in an office on Monday. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. And my counterintuitive perspective, it was actually, getting rid of some of those shackles is really important, and freedom is fundamental. But don't say no to all frameworks, because actually you need some tracks to run on when you live in your life to help you live it.
Completely. You know, one of the bases of and previously in my life I was an EOS implementer, you know, is this idea that entrepreneurial operating system, because entrepreneurs are very sparky, energetic folks who are full of good ideas, and at some point, you know, you have to bring them down to the ground and deliver on them. You have to get that traction to see them deliver. And so, it's, of course, it's great to wake up and go, I do not have to be in the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know, and I am an entrepreneur who wants to make the most of the opportunities that are out in the world. Whilst at the same time, you know, why do we call it business? You know, because business is about doing things in a repetitive, consistently high standard that evolves over time. And so putting some just guardrails around entrepreneurs or business leaders,
tracks, isn't it? What the tracks
play, you know, and it is saying to folks, okay, you have this ambition, you woke up with this incredible idea, either around your business or a new initiative within the business. What happened to that? And how did we make sure that you did stay on track to do that? Because equally well, entrepreneurs quickly get bored, you know, and quickly go, that was a great idea yesterday, but not so much today. Well, how do you lead a team of people when you are not being held accountable? So what happens is it gets more out of you, and it gets more out of your team and more out of your business as a real, and actually removes a lot of the stress and friction. that exists.
But I actually think, because I mean, the more I work with clients who are at this transition, my experience is that often, even if you've got an individual who's not particularly entrepreneurial, going through a process where they've had these tracks to a world where they're retired isn't always a healthy transition, because actually the vacuum gets filled on stuff that isn't making their life meaningful. You know, what I'm always curious about is helping people live those higher quality lives, regardless of whether they're entrepreneurial or not. But I suppose for business owners, when you reach your 50s and 60s, and I've got 2 years to go now till I reach my 50s, so this is getting particularly pertinent for me. When you reach your 50s and 60s, in your experience, what unique challenges do we face when we get to that age?
I think there's probably three things that crop up time and again. One is around identity.
Yeah.
So much of their identity gets wrapped up in our jobs or our businesses. You know, I am an accountant. Yeah, I am a technical person. I am a retailer. I am whatever that job has been. So that the idea of not having that job, not having that business, and therefore who am I? Becomes a challenge. I think there's the challenge of legacy and letting go. Yeah, is that for a lot of people, I'm as they grow older, more mature, more experienced, of course they get more accomplished quite often, and therefore it's, well, I'm very good at what I do. Yeah, and what happens afterwards? Yeah, if I'm not around to do this, and of course sometimes people are not necessarily very good at delegating and not very good at letting go of some of these things, so that can become a challenge. And there's also just energy management. Is the phrase will often be heard, I can't do the things that I used to do in my 20s and 30s. Yeah, they haven't necessarily got the same energy. We do age. Now, I am of a mind that the people who are in their 50s and 60s now are not the people who were in their 50s and 60s 10 or 20 years ago.
100%. Yeah.
We've had many more advantages that keep us fitter and healthier than perhaps our parents' generation, for example. So getting these things and saying, okay, my identity, or one of my identities is as an accountant, or as a retailer, or as a farmer, or as a an IT director, or whatever is. So that's one identity. Who else are you? Yeah. Husband, wife, partner, parent, brother, sister, whatever. And also, for many people that they also, I'm a walker, I'm a fisherman, I'm a sailor, I'm a, whatever else is, I still play football, I still play squash, I am fit, I'm active, is those other identities.
I remember having a really interesting conversation with a business owner client of mine, and we were finished off his financial plan. He knew that to achieve this, what happens next moment, the business sale had to be part of the mix, and he'd gone through a process where the business was going to be sold. And he phoned me one day, Ian, and said, "Can I come in for a conversation?" And I said, "Well, look, he said, "No, not about the money. I just want to sort of pick brains and something." And the question he asked me sort of really made me think about the work we do. And he said to me, "I'm selling this business. It's taken me 28 years to build the business to where it is today. On the day of sale, I'm not going to be the business owner anymore. Who am I if I'm not that?" And that's scary for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I've certainly worked with a number of people who that's been the experience. They go, Ian, work with me, get to a point, sell the business, and then it's like, right, who am I? What am I? And so I've certainly learned that it's important. I think for two reasons to back that conversation up. Have that conversation almost at the outset. It's okay. I'd love to work with you. I would love to get you to a point where you get to sell the business and you get to be and do what you really want to be and do.
Yeah.
And when they say at that point, I'm not clear what I want. I don't know what I want. Yeah. Excuse me. And say, that's fine. So we get to have the conversation that explores that. And of course, if what we can do is get that sense of coherence of who they are, what they love and what they really enjoy, and perhaps what their purpose is, they actually get to be better at what they do during those years that perhaps they are growing the business or exiting the business, because now there's a greater degree of freedom. This is who I am. This is what I enjoy. This is what I'm going to enjoy doing much more of if I wasn't, having to turn up the business 8 to 10 hours a day. And the people around them therefore begin to recognize that they are different and better people as a result of that.
Yeah. Really interesting. Yeah. I'm curious though, because you've been through a number of changes in your career and life. What have you learned during your journey that's not, that supports the work you do now when you're working with clients?
There's one very, it might sound trite, it might sound a little glibber response is, there's no such thing as failures, there's just feedback. Yeah. So it's phrasing it a different way, learning from your mistakes. Yeah. And the importance, therefore, of having the opportunity to say, okay, here is a pivotal point, what's brought me to here? What have I learned? What do I want to take forward? And what do I perhaps want to say, right, that's done. Yeah. And so that's been important. Frankly, it is celebrating the success and going, right, that went particularly well, but it's over and done now. Yeah. But congratulations, well done. Let's have, an acknowledgement of the success of that. Yeah. And it is recognizing that for me and for many others, sometimes the time is right. Yeah. That you outgrow things.
How do we know? How do we know when the time's right?
Well, sometimes, the world will tell you, and I recall early in my career, I was in retail, and I was running, a bunch of Woolworths stores, and when you get to the point where you can so predict what's going to go on, it almost begins to feel like Groundhog Day. Yeah. And so that's telling you, or it certainly told me, well, I've mastered this now. Yeah. What's the next challenge?
There's no variety left, right? There's
Correct.
no
Yeah. And some people, that they are happy with that, and that's fantastic. For some people, when they get to that point, put frankly, as they kind of go, same shit, different day. Yeah. Then that's probably telling them that it's time to move on. Sometimes it's having a conversation with someone that just allows them the time and space to explore that and or what else they might want to do, that they begin to recognize that, yes, it is. I've done as much as I can here. Yeah. For me, what's important is this idea of lifelong learning is, when I ask a question, so what are you learning now? Yeah. And I think there's always an opportunity to learn, but some people go, not as much as I would like. Yeah. And that therefore may be that moment where they recognize that it's time to change, move on, do something different.
Now that's really interesting. That element of saying, I'm not being intellectually challenged, for want of a better phrase, by the current situation, instead of just going into cruise control and saying, I'm quite comfortable, finding an opportunity to get that challenge in our life. I think it's actually healthy.
I think there's another dimension to this, Chris, as well, which is also about one's values. Yeah. Now, I describe it the fact that I had 30-year apprenticeship in corporate life, learning a lot under those circumstances. But in the last 10 or 12 years is what I've recognized and understood are what my core values are.
Sure.
Not a conversation I had with myself or with others during, as it were, that 30-year corporate world. And therefore it is, so what are those things that drive me? And are they aligned with what I'm doing? Are they aligned with the people around me? Are they aligned with, what I want to do and achieve? And I think that if people have that conversation and they say, right, what's really important to me is adventure, and I'm not getting in any adventure, then that's telling you something. If some people look and say, what's really important to me is people, and my relationship with people. And if what they're doing is not giving that connection with people, then again, it's something that tells you, okay, so where do we find the opportunity where you and your values are aligned with what you're doing?
It's so that values conversation is such an interesting one. And I don't know about your experience in corporate life, but my one typically was when I worked in corporate, often values are one of those things they put on a wall or put in a guidebook, and everybody went, how does this apply to my day-to-day experience of working in the organisation? It's only since I've become a small business owner I've actually thought about, and I stayed cynical about values for ages, by the way, not anymore, but thought about and talked about the importance of values in business and life. What do you think? How do we get over that cynicism that corporate life trains us to be cynical about values?
I completely agree and understand that. It's and I am somewhat mischievous in the respect of frequently asking the question of business leaders and senior people in business. Okay, so you've got some core values here. They go, absolutely. And I go, what are they? Yeah. And the number of times we go, we've got 3 of them, we've got 5 of them. And I go, what are they? And they go, well, it's what are the others? And you're right, is that sometimes they are on the posters on the wall, they're on coasters, they are in the foyer of their building, but they're not lived and breathed. Yeah.
So I'm mischievous as well. So when I'm talking about with my team the values of my business, I'm doing this on Wednesday. I add something that's how do we actually act in line with our values in our day-to-day lives and work, and then it's an awkward question often, isn't it? It's like, how do we actually do that? And sometimes it's an awkward question for me. Do you know what I mean? How am I in a position where I'm acting towards my values? But again, it's a really good guardrail to think about the sort of life I want to live. Now, one question that I did want to ask is about your book. Now, have you written a book on critical thinking?
I wrote a book last year called Good Judgment, which is a phrase that's been important to me through my career, sometimes when it's been absent. And part of that was clearly about critical thinking, is how do we arrive at good judgments? And of course, judgment can be quite a loaded phrase for some people, that it's judgmental. But to my mind, it's how do we arrive at good decisions and good understanding of what's going on around us. So I think it's one of those really important things, both for as it were an individual and also for people in professional life.
So how do we make the decisions?
So read the book. Is my
long answer.
The slightly longer answer.
Well,
I think
by the way, we'll make sure we put a link to the book in the comments so that everybody can pick up.
Thank you very much. That's kind. I think there are a number of things. Number one, I started by looking and saying patience, the importance of patience. We live in a very fast-moving life, and I've certainly in my career been in a position whereby some very, very big decisions had to be made very, very quickly and under very pressured circumstances. But the importance of patience, taking a breath, giving ourselves the opportunity to just stop and think for a moment. Yeah. Giving ourselves to do that becomes important. Secondly, having developed certain processes. Yeah. So developing how we think. So in a situation whereby there may be a requirement for a fast decision, you can tap into a way of critical thinking. So, have I got the right information? Have I talked to the right people? Have I explored the alternatives? What happens if I don't make this decision? Just those things become much more embedded. Absolutely, the importance of other people. So how do I have a group of people around me who help me develop my thinking, have different perspectives, challenge what I'm doing and saying? Curiosity, just developing the art of curiosity. So asking more questions. And it's a phrase that was introduced to me a while back. Have I got enough information to make a decision? Have I got enough evidence yet to prosecute? And often the answer is no. So what's the question I need to ask? With that becomes that area of listening, because many of us are not particularly good at listening and taking the opportunity to listen to what's being said before we react. Yeah. And so if you bring, many of these things together, it will help with our critical thinking and with our judgment that helps us not only make decisions, but also make, and this is an important part of it, an improving decision-making process. Yeah. That we often talk about people gaining wisdom as they grow older. And I think some of that is because we've just made many more decisions, but we've also improved our decision-making and critical thinking processes.
So a couple of questions on that. How do we make sure, because I'm with you, I think diversity of thought and diversity of opinion can give you a bit of a framework. So how do we make sure that we're surrounding ourselves with people who are going to give us that challenge? And it's really interesting. How do we not get bogged down in analysis paralysis, for want of a better phrase, where we're just examining everything, we don't actually decide?
It's a good challenge, and it's a good question. For me, it is absolutely having people around me who are different. Yeah. So if there are those people who, and I certainly used to work for someone, and I used to report into him, and he really struggled to make decisions. Yeah. And that under certain circumstances was valuable. When I might have been prepared to rush to judgment and to rush to a conclusion, he would ask one more question that had me saying, I don't know. And I think that therefore that's important. And I learned a lesson from that. But if he'd been left to his own devices, I'm not so sure he would ever have come to a decision. And so I think it is important that you have people around you who are different, and do have, different approaches. That some people who do say, right, what's the decision? Yeah, come on, let's make the decision, let's get going. And there are other people who are a little bit more thoughtful. And that, you know, there are those people who, may well just have certain skills. There are some people who are, you know, much more numerate. There are some people who are much more literate. There are some people who are much more, you know, kinesthetic, you know, and that they just learn in different ways and they approach things in different ways. And having the preparedness to say, okay, let's take Chris's view and compare that with Ian's view, and just do things differently in that way.
I think the other interesting thing as well, particularly for us, is often not taking action is a decision, right? So I've got, you know, as we talk about this, there's a little bit of volatility in the stock market, and I've had calls from clients, and we've experienced this time and time again. But I've had calls from clients saying, "What do we do?" And the right answer, history tells us, and all the evidence tells us, is absolutely nothing. And that's a decision. You know, it hasn't always got to be like we've got to take action every time. And it goes back to that patience element. You know, the evidence points us that actually in certain areas we want to take action, but understanding that sometimes it's not always the right time to move is really important as well. And I think often, you know, particularly our clients and your clients, they're reliant on that professional perspective to say, you know, what do we do when I feel that I should take action, but I don't know whether it's going to be in my best interest. It's really, really interesting. When we're thinking about making better decisions and we're thinking about that specific chapter in our lives, you know, in our 50s and 60s, and we're thinking about what happens next, what do we need to do to make sure we're making the right decisions when we're at that crossroads?
Stop, breathe, recognize that. And I think this is as relevant to the question you ask here as almost many of the circumstances, is that seldom is this a point. It will be a spectrum. It'll be a process. You know, negotiation isn't, you know, just one outcome. It's what are the potential series of outcomes. And so it is, okay, what are the options? Yeah, what are the options that I might want to consider? And I'm a strong advocate of, you know, the plain piece of paper. Yeah, sometimes the bigger the better. And it is just jot it down. And I have a habit, which was a well-established habit early on, you know, is I'll write, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. And the moment that I've put the fifth thing down, I've already written 6, because it's what next, or what else, what else, what else.
Yeah.
So it's what are the options? And again, that's where I suggest is, so even if you filled the piece of paper, and even if you've got, you know, many ideas and many options, go and talk to somebody else. Get a different perspective. You know, do some triangulation. When somebody says, wouldn't it be a great idea if, go and take another perspective that allows someone to suggest something different. Doing the work that I do, there is this wonderful homespun statement that I will make to people, which is, it is impossible to read the label from inside the jar. When we are inside our own heads, when we are inside our own experience, we need the people from the outside, the objective potential observer, to give some perspective.
And that's where coaches and mentors come into play. Correct. Right? Like we're too close to our own lives.
Yes, absolutely. To have somebody who, you know, you can trust, to have a confidential, safe, secure conversation to explore options. And to potentially, comes back to that accountability. So if someone says, I've always wanted to go ocean rot sailing, you go, okay, so what's held you back from going and doing, you know, ocean racing? And how might you do that as your next step?
Yeah.
What has to be in place to do that? What's potentially holding you back? What might encourage you to do that? I think becomes important. And then say, okay, so what's the first step? Yeah. What's the first step that you're going to take? And what might the step be after that? And when do we check in to ensure that you're moving and progressing towards this goal?
There's a great, I think I mention it in every What Happens Next interview, but there's a great book by a guy called Bill Burnett called Life by Design, I think it's called. I might be wrong on that. Or Design Your Life. And it's how to apply design thinking to the way we want to live our lives. And in design thinking, there's a really interesting concept called rapid low-cost experimentation. So it's that element of if somebody wants to join a yacht tour and go around the world, actually that feels too big. But one low-cost experiment is to go to an open evening to find out a little bit more about the trip. And the next one might be, I'm going to do one sailing lesson to see how I fit. It's those incremental steps to get us to that sort of main goal. Tell me a story, Ian, about where you've worked with somebody to help them design their What Happens Next, and what that process looked like for both you and for the client.
That's a really great question, Chris. I worked with a business leader who had, bought the business from his father. He'd worked with his father for a period of time and had effectively, bought the business from his father. And one of the things that we talked about, because it was therefore early in both his development and the development of the business, is to say at that stage, okay, what do you think does this business look like? What does the mountain look like at that point? And also, so how does it fit? Yeah, how does it fit with, as it were, age and stage of life? What are the other things that you want to think about? Yeah. And at that point, he had one child, and subsequently has now got a second child. It's where does it all fit together in that kind of life plan? And if you were to get to where you anticipate you can take this business over the next few years, what would the decisions that you need to make at that point be? Is this that you just want to keep on scaling it? Do you want to build a team of people to run it on your behalf? Do you want to sell it? What do you want to do? And so it was exploring at that point, all of the options that might will be available. And it was, and what's next? Yeah. What is it that you truly, truly like and enjoy? And it was a recognition for him at that point is that, which is not an unusual experience, is that people enjoy the early part of conceiving of the business and growing it and develop, but they don't mind building it. They don't like running it. They like the idea of putting all of the pieces into place, but they never want to have to dust it and polish it. And so it was that, therefore, what he wanted to do was put himself into the position to therefore be that incubator for future businesses. Is that he wanted to be able to, and that's what we've done. That he's now at a point he was able to successfully, sell that business now. And it was also recognizing that, he may be that typical entrepreneur, is that he wanted to, move very quickly. Get in, do what he wanted to do, invest in it, move on to the next thing. And that's, so we're tapping into that. And what I learned from that, was absolutely this idea of start with the end in mind. Where do you truly want to get? And also for me to step back and go, this isn't about me, which is fundamental to being a great coach, is this isn't about me. It's not about my solutions. It's not about my interests. Any judgment that I have, I suspend. that what I do is I say, okay, what might be the best route for them? And the fact that there's almost this infinite variety. Yeah. Chris is not Ian. Ian is not Tom, Dick, or Harriet. That we're truly individual, is that we are all on different routes. And also prepare for the unexpected. Yeah. Because sure enough, that the sale of that particular business happened way faster than anybody imagined. But in a way, it was because we truly unlocked the potential of that business and the energy of that business at the, as it were, the early enough stage. Yeah.
I get that. And he's now spending his time, I'd imagine, doing stuff that he really wants to do, and it excites him every day.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yes.
Tell me about the role coaches and mentors have played in your life.
So, it's a very good question. Back in my youth, I was very fortunate to have some great coaches. In my sporting life, I used to run, and recognizing the importance of having somebody who could see what I couldn't see, was truly important. It's a phrase I use often: unleashing and unlocking the potential. There's, for whatever reason, they could see what I couldn't see.
Interesting.
And that being prepared to trust that those individuals who would say, right, we're going to go and do this on the track today, or we're going to go do this in the gym today, or we're going to go and do this session, and just turning up and doing it, in the confidence that they could see where it would take me. And subsequently, therefore, in business, and I will talk to people about how I play in this kind of space between coach and mentor, because coach is that point where it is just asking the questions that gets the individual to understand where they're at from a very neutral place of not putting me into that equation. When you move towards that mentoring part, it is because you've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Sure. And sometimes the questions therefore come with a little bit more. So have you thought about, or have you explored? Because as mentor, I can see some of those things. So I've been very fortunate to work with some people who have challenged me. And I'd say sometimes I didn't enjoy it. It was the reason I wasn't enjoying it. I would sometimes get overly defensive, and I've learned over time to be much less defensive, because people were acting in my best interest, and they were challenging me and stretching me to do things that I didn't think I was capable of doing, or wanted to defend what I was doing. And so throughout my career, I've had some great mentors and great coaches. And I would also say, some of those people who challenged me, I didn't particularly like. Sometimes they challenged me in ways where I was able to walk away afterwards and go, yep, now I know I'm never going to do it that way. I'm never going to be that person. But I've been very fortunate to have some really great coaches and mentors around me.
I think it's interesting when it comes to challenging questions, because to try and avoid them is a bit of a fallacy, isn't it? Because we all need that element. Both we need to ask those challenging questions at times and answer them, but doing it. To do it with enough humanity so that we're giving people the opportunity to give us a genuine answer and help them is a certain different thing. But I look at my own life and career and say, actually, I didn't like challenging questions, but I always learned something from the answer that I sort of answered myself at that particular point in time. And that might not be the answer that I gave immediately, but on reflection, it's a real opportunity to learn. Ian, thank you for your time today. I've really loved talking to you for What Happens Next, and there's bucket loads of insight on here. Now, one thing I didn't know about you is your background in retail. I should have known, but your background in retail. So before we talk a little bit about where people can find out a bit more about you, we always like to throw a bit of a random conversation into what happens next.
Okay,
what's the best pick and mix / old school sweet that you can get? Rhubarb and custard was always my favourite, but I always liked a cola cube as well. How about you?
Do you know what? It's funny how, you know, in there is absolutely what I would always call the Coke bottles, the cola.
Bottles, yeah, 100%.
And I do like a milk bottle, yeah, a milk. But the Milady Devon toffees were always top of my pick and mix.
I don't think I've ever had a Devon. No, I must have had a Devon.
Never had a Devon.
I remember the Milady ones, but I'll have to. There's an old school sweet shop in Leigh-on-Sea High Street that's sort of my Achilles heel at the minute because I'm popping in there and they've got all the jars really traditionally laid out as well. Yeah. So you can go. I'll have a sort of a pour full of them and a pour full of them. Deadly. Yeah.
There's it's certainly something that you. And I have to say, I have a little bit of fun with people, because when they ask me about the Korean, I will say, my time working with Woolworth, and I will look at it and go, because everybody stole some pick and mix from Woolies at some point in their life, didn't they? And most people go, yeah, and then suddenly go, oh, yeah.
I'm just admitting I've pinched.
So they've just owned up to their low-level pilfering.
Exactly, yeah, low-level criminal behaviour. On that note, where can people find out a bit more about you?
Well, you can either go to my website, which is ianpricenewplace.co.uk. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can reach out and contact me directly. So I always look forward to talking to people.
Brilliant. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.